Michael Carson had always believed in the power of routine. At 57, he found comfort in the predictable rhythm of his days. Morning coffee with the newspaper, the familiar drive to his architectural firm, evenings spent in his workshop crafting wooden furniture, a hobby he'd cultivated over 30 years of marriage to Eleanor. Their life together had settled into a comfortable pattern after raising 2 children who were now adults with lives of their own. On this particular Tuesday morning in April, Michael sat at his drafting table in the sunroom of their suburban home, sketching ideas for a new client's lakeside cabin. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on his work. Eleanor had left earlier for her weekly tennis match, a standing appointment she'd kept religiously for the past year. He reached for his coffee mug, finding it empty. As he walked to the kitchen for a refill, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from David, his longtime friend and business partner. Michael frowned. David rarely texted, preferring to call, and the urgency in his message was unusual. He replied quickly, agreeing to the meeting, then poured his coffee and returned to his drafting table. But the interrupted flow of his morning had unsettled him, and he found himself unable to focus on his work. An hour later, Michael spotted David sitting on a bench overlooking the river. His friend's shoulders were hunched, his expression grim. Michael felt a knot form in his stomach. David didn't look at him immediately. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this," he said, his voice low. "I saw Eleanor yesterday. She wasn't at tennis." Michael's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? She always has tennis on Mondays." "She was at the Grand Hotel downtown," David continued, his eyes finally meeting Michael's. "She was with someone, a man." Michael felt a chill run through him despite the warm spring day. "Maybe it was a client," he offered. Eleanor worked as a real estate agent. Meetings with clients were common. David shook his head slowly. "Mike, they were intimate, holding hands across the table. And then he trailed off, unable to finish. "They kissed. Not like friends, Mike. And then they went upstairs together." The world seemed to tilt beneath Michael's feet. He gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles turning white. "You must be mistaken," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew David wouldn't make something like this up. "I wish I was," David replied softly. "I wouldn't tell you if I wasn't certain. I saw them check in together. They were there for almost 2 hours." Michael sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he was hearing. Eleanor, his wife of 30 years, the mother of his children, the woman he'd built a life with, having an affair? It seemed impossible, yet a cold weight settled in his chest as pieces began to fall into place. Her sudden interest in tennis a year ago, the new clothes, the late nights at work events, the decreased intimacy between them. "I'm sorry, Mike," David said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I thought you should know." Michael nodded mechanically, his mind racing. "I need to be sure," he said finally, his voice hollow. Over the next week, Michael became a detective in his own home. He observed Eleanor with new eyes, noting how she checked her phone more frequently when she thought he wasn't looking, how she always took calls in another room, how her tennis bag sometimes returned suspiciously clean. He hated himself for it, but one evening while Eleanor was showering, he checked her phone. His hands trembled as he navigated to her messages. There, under a contact named Margie T., were exchanges that made his stomach turn. They weren't explicitly incriminating, but the tone was intimate, with references to our time and missing you. The next day, Michael called Eleanor's tennis club, pretending to be looking for her during an emergency. The receptionist informed him that Mrs. Carson hadn't attended her regular session in over 6 months. That night, as they ate dinner in near silence, a growing norm in their household, Michael studied his wife's face. The familiar lines around her eyes, the curve of her lips that had once made his heart race. Now, all he felt was a hollow ache. Eleanor didn't miss a beat. "Good. Sarah's improving her backhand, finally." The lie slid from her lips so easily that Michael almost doubted what he knew. Almost. "That's nice," he replied, forcing himself to take another bite of food he could no longer taste. Later that week, Michael followed Eleanor to what should have been her tennis match. Instead, she drove to the Grand Hotel, just as David had described. Michael parked across the street, his heart pounding painfully in his chest as he watched her enter the lobby. 20 minutes later, a man arrived, tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit. Michael recognized him immediately, Richard Townsend, a prominent real estate developer in the city. Through the large windows of the hotel lobby, Michael watched as Eleanor greeted Richard with a kiss that was anything but casual. They walked to the elevator together, his hand resting intimately on the small of her back. Michael sat in his car for hours, numb with shock and grief. When Eleanor returned home that evening, her cheeks flushed and hair slightly disheveled, she spoke of a challenging match and drinks with the girls afterward. The casual deception cut deeper than Michael could have imagined. Hatchell. That night, lying awake beside his sleeping wife, Michael made a decision. He would confront her, but not yet. First, he needed to understand the full extent of the betrayal and prepare himself for whatever came next. The following day, Michael hired a private investigator, a discreet professional recommended by a colleague who had gone through a similar ordeal. The PI confirmed what Michael already knew and uncovered more. Eleanor and Richard had been meeting regularly for at least 8 months. They had weekend getaways disguised as real estate conferences. There were dinner receipts, hotel bookings, and photographs that left no room for doubt. Each new revelation was a fresh wound, but Michael forced himself to look at every piece of evidence, to accept the reality of his shattered marriage. The anger came in waves, sometimes so intense he had to leave the house to avoid confronting Eleanor before he was ready. During this time, Michael confided only in David, who provided a steady presence and a sympathetic ear. He couldn't bring himself to tell his children yet. Jennifer, 28, living in Boston with her husband, and Mark, 25, working abroad. The thought of disrupting their lives with this news felt like another failure. As the evidence mounted, so did Michael's resolve. He met with a lawyer, discreetly gathering information about his options. Their assets, retirement accounts, the house they had lovingly renovated together, all of it would need to be divided. The practical aspects of dismantling a 30-year marriage were overwhelming, but focusing on these details gave Michael a sense of control when everything else felt chaotic. 3 weeks after David's revelation, Michael felt ready to confront Eleanor. He had the facts. He had consulted professionals. He had begun to prepare for a life he never imagined he would have to face. Michael chose a Sunday morning for the confrontation. Their house was quietest then, with no chance of interruptions. Eleanor was sitting in the kitchen, reading the newspaper and sipping her coffee, a picture of domestic tranquility that now seemed like a cruel joke. Michael placed a folder on the table between them. About Richard Townsend. The color drained from Eleanor's face. For a moment, she said nothing, her fingers gripping her coffee mug tightly. I know everything, Eleanor, Michael said, opening the folder to reveal the photographs, the hotel receipts, the timeline of their affair meticulously documented by the PI. I know about the hotel meetings. I know there haven't been any tennis matches for months. I know about the weekend in Napa Valley. Eleanor stared at the evidence before her, her composure crumbling. How did you... Does it matter? Michael interrupted. What matters is that you've been lying to me for months. Years, maybe. Michael let out a bitter laugh. Really? Because I think my wife of 30 years has been having an affair with a wealthy client. I think she's been lying to my face every day, coming home from her lover and sitting across from me at dinner like nothing was wrong. His voice rose with each word, the anger he'd been containing finally breaking free. I never meant to hurt you, Eleanor said, tears now streaming down her face. That's the problem, isn't it? Michael replied, his tone cold. You never thought about me at all. Eleanor reached across the table, trying to take his hand, but Michael pulled away. Please, let me explain, she pleaded. Explain what? How you could betray everything we built together. How you could look me in the eye day after day and lie. It just happened, she said weakly. Richard and we connected. He understands me in ways. Don't, Michael cut her off, his voice dangerously quiet. Don't tell me how your affair partner understands you better than your husband of 30 years. Don't insult me like that. Michael closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the blow. A year, he repeated. A year of lies. A year of making a fool of me. Sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught? Michael asked, his voice sharp with bitterness. I want you to leave, Michael said firmly. Today. Pack what you need and go. A home you are willing to destroy for your affair, Michael countered. You can stay with Richard, since he understands you so well. It's not that simple, Eleanor protested. We can't just throw away 30 years of marriage. You already did that, Michael said, standing up. I've spoken to a lawyer. You'll be hearing from them this week. I've been preparing for the reality you created, Michael corrected her. Now, I'd like you to leave. I can't look at you right now. I'm not discussing this further. Not today. You have until this evening to pack your things. With that, Michael walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, and into the cool morning air. His hands were shaking, his heart racing, but beneath the turmoil, he felt something unexpected. Relief. The confrontation he had dreaded was over. The truth was out. And now, painful as it was, he could begin to move forward. The weeks following Eleanor's departure were a blur of legal meetings, financial discussions, and sleepless nights. Michael threw himself into his work, taking on new projects that required his full attention and staying late at the office to avoid returning to the empty house. The hardest part was telling their children. Michael had insisted on doing it together with Eleanor, a final act of parental unity before everything changed. Jennifer and Mark had flown home for the weekend, sensing from their father's serious tone that something significant had happened. Sitting in the living room where they had opened Christmas presents and celebrated birthdays for decades, Michael and Eleanor broke the news. Jennifer had cried, asking questions neither of them wanted to answer. Mark had sat in stunned silence before excusing himself to take a walk alone. Later, when Eleanor had left to stay at a hotel, both children had approached Michael separately. Jennifer had hugged him tightly, whispering, "I'm so sorry, Dad." Mark had been more reserved, offering a firm handshake that turned into an awkward embrace, saying only, "Whatever you need, I'm here." Their support meant everything to Michael, but it couldn't fill the void that Eleanor's betrayal had left. 30 years of shared history, of inside jokes and familiar routines, of knowing each other's thoughts almost before they were spoken. All of it tainted now by the knowledge that while he had been fully committed, she had been living a double life. Friends and family reacted with varying degrees of shock and sympathy. Some, like David, had been steadfast in their support. Others seemed uncomfortable, unsure how to navigate the sudden dissolution of a marriage they had thought was solid. A few mutual friends had distanced themselves, unwilling to choose sides. The most surprising reaction came from Eleanor's sister, Catherine. She had shown up at Michael's door one evening, a bottle of whiskey in hand. "I never liked Richard Townsend," she said bluntly as Michael let her in. "Too slick by half." They had sat in the kitchen, sharing drinks and memories. Catherine had been part of his life for as long as Eleanor had, a sister-in-law who had become a friend. "She's making a mistake," Catherine told him, her words slightly slurred after her second drink. "She thinks he's going to leave his wife for her. He won't." Michael had stared at her, the glass halfway to his lips. "Richard is married?" "No," Michael had replied, a bitter laugh escaping him. "I guess the PI missed that detail." The knowledge that Eleanor was not just an adulterer, but the other woman in someone else's marriage, had added another layer of disillusionment. Who was this person he had shared his life with? Had he ever really known her at all? As the divorce proceedings progressed, Michael learned that Richard had indeed been married throughout his affair with Eleanor, to a woman who was now also filing for divorce. The tangled web of deception and betrayal seemed to grow more complex with each new revelation. Eleanor had tried to contact Michael several times, leaving voicemails asking to talk, to explain, to find closure. He had ignored most of them, responding only through his lawyer. The pain was still too raw, the anger too close to the surface. Then, 6 weeks after their confrontation, Michael received a text message from Eleanor that he couldn't ignore. "Richard ended things. I have nowhere to go. Can we talk?" Michael stared at the message for a long time, emotions warring within him. Part of him, a small, vindictive part he wasn't proud of, felt satisfaction that Richard had discarded Eleanor just as Catherine had predicted. Another part felt a reflexive concern for the woman who had been his partner for 3 decades. In the end, it was the latter that won out. He agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, where they were unlikely to run into anyone they knew. Eleanor looked different when she arrived, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, and none of the confident glow she had carried during her affair. She slid into the seat across from him, her hands clutching her purse tightly. "Richard went back to his wife," Eleanor continued, her voice hollow. "He said he couldn't leave her, that it would cost him too much in the divorce." "Were you ever going to tell me? Or were you waiting for him to leave his wife so you could leave me cleanly?" Eleanor looked down at the table. "I don't know," she admitted. "I wasn't thinking clearly. I got caught up in the excitement, the attention." "30 years, Eleanor," Michael said, his voice tight with emotion. 30 years, and you threw it away for excitement. "I know," she whispered. "I know how much I've hurt you, and I'm sorry. Truly sorry." Michael studied her face, searching for the woman he had loved for so long. "What do you want from me, Eleanor? Forgiveness? A place to stay? What?" "I don't know," she said again, tears welling in her eyes. I thought maybe we could try to work things out. Go to counseling. Start over." Michael was silent for a long moment, considering her words. Then he shook his head slowly. "No," he said firmly. "I can't do that. I can't go back to wondering every time you're late, or checking your phone when you're not looking. I can't live like that." Eleanor's tears spilled over. "I understand," she said, her voice breaking. "I wouldn't trust me either." "The divorce papers are being finalized," Michael told her. "My lawyer says we should be done within a month." "You'll get your share of the equity," Michael assured her. "Everything will be divided fairly. I'm not looking to punish you, Eleanor. I just want to move on." "And what about us?" she asked, a hint of desperation in her voice. 30 years, Michael. Can we at least be friends?" Michael considered the question carefully. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe someday. But not now. Now I need space and time to heal." Eleanor nodded again, accepting his answer. They finished their coffee in awkward silence, the weight of their shared history and broken future hanging between them. As they stood to leave, Eleanor reached out impulsively and touched his arm. "I did love you," she said earnestly. "Please believe that." Michael looked into her eyes one last time, seeing the woman he had married, the mother of his children, the partner of his youth. "I know," he said softly. "That's what makes it so hard." He walked away then, out of the coffee shop and into the bright afternoon, feeling as though he had finally closed a chapter of his life. The pain was still there, but alongside it was something new. The first tentative steps toward acceptance and, perhaps someday, peace. Summer faded into fall, and with the changing seasons came gradual changes in Michael's life. The divorce was finalized in September, a sterile legal proceeding that reduced 30 years of marriage to signatures on documents and division of assets. Michael kept the house, buying out Eleanor's share with some of his retirement savings. It was worth it to him to maintain the one constant in his upended life. The first few months of living alone had been the hardest. The silence of the house seemed to mock him, highlighting Eleanor's absence in every room. He found himself talking aloud sometimes, just to hear a human voice. He ate meals standing at the kitchen counter, unable to face the dining table where they had shared thousands of dinners. Slowly, though, he began to reclaim the space. He converted Eleanor's home office into a proper workshop, something he had always wanted but never pursued out of consideration for her dislike of sawdust in the house. He rearranged furniture, painted walls, and gradually transformed their home into his home. Work provided structure and purpose. Michael's architectural firm had always been his passion, and now he poured even more of himself into it. He took on challenging projects, mentored younger architects, and found satisfaction in creating spaces that would outlast him. His children visited when they could. Jennifer, pregnant with her first child, had been especially attentive, calling almost daily and visiting monthly. Mark had returned from abroad for a 2-week stay, during which they had rebuilt the deck together, working side by side in companionable silence, punctuated by occasional conversation about everything except Eleanor. Friends rallied around him in different ways. David and his wife Sarah included Michael in dinner parties and weekend outings. Catherine, surprisingly, maintained contact, occasionally sending him articles she thought he'd find interesting or updates on mutual acquaintances. "You're only 57, Mike," she had said during one of their now regular phone calls. "That's practically adolescent these days." Michael had laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised him with its ease. "I don't think I'm ready for that," he had told her. "Not saying marry someone tomorrow," Catherine had replied. "Just be open to possibilities." The idea had seemed absurd at first. Michael hadn't dated since his 20s. The thought of navigating modern romance, with its apps and texting protocols, was intimidating. But Catherine's words had planted a seed. In November, Michael attended a charity gala for the local children's hospital, an annual event his firm always supported. He went alone, steeling himself for the inevitable questions and sympathetic looks from acquaintances who knew about his divorce. He was studying the silent auction items when a voice beside him said, "The painting's nice, but the frame is all wrong for it." Michael turned to find a woman about his age, elegantly dressed in a simple black dress, her gray-streaked hair styled in a short, sophisticated cut. They chatted easily about art, architecture, and the merits of the various auction items. Claire, he learned, was a retired art history professor who now worked as a consultant for museums and private collectors. She was witty, knowledgeable, and refreshingly direct. "Are you here with someone?" she asked, after they had been talking for nearly half an hour. Claire nodded, neither offering sympathy nor prying for details. "I've been divorced for 12 years, she said. "Best decision I ever made, though it didn't feel that way at the time." Her candor was unexpected and strangely comforting. They ended up sitting together during dinner, continuing their conversation through the speeches and presentations. When the evening concluded, Michael found himself reluctant to say goodbye. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" he asked, surprising himself with his boldness. Claire smiled, a warm, genuine expression that reached her eyes. "I'd like that," she said, taking his offered business card and writing her number on the back of one of her own. That coffee date led to dinner the following week, which led to a Sunday afternoon at an art exhibition, which led to more dinners, more conversations, more shared interests discovered. Michael found himself looking forward to their time together, enjoying the simple pleasure of getting to know someone new. He was careful not to rush, mindful of the emotional wounds that were still healing. Claire seemed to understand without being told, never pushing for more than he was ready to give. She had her own life, her own friends, her own routines that she had established in her years of independence. There was no desperate need to merge lives, just a mutual enjoyment of each other's company. By Christmas, Michael felt ready to introduce Claire to Jennifer and her husband when they came to visit. It was a casual dinner at his home, nothing formal or pressured. Jennifer had been wary at first, protective of her father, but by the end of the evening she was exchanging book recommendations with Claire and inviting her to the baby shower planned for February. "I like her," Jennifer told Michael later as they washed dishes together. "She's not trying to be mom, and she makes you smile." Michael hadn't realized how much he had needed his daughter's approval until he heard those words. "She does make me smile," he agreed. New Year's Eve found Michael and Claire at her condo, a stylish space filled with art and books that reflected her personality. They cooked dinner together, opened a bottle of good wine, and talked about their hopes for the coming year. "Any resolutions?" Claire asked as they settled on her balcony to watch the distant fireworks at midnight. Michael considered the question. "To keep moving forward," he said finally. "To build something new without forgetting what I've learned from the past." Claire nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's a good one," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "To moving forward." As the fireworks exploded across the night sky, Michael felt a sense of possibility that had been absent for too long. The pain of Eleanor's betrayal hadn't disappeared. He suspected it never would completely, but it had diminished, becoming just one part of a story rather than its defining chapter. Life continued to evolve in unexpected ways. In February, Jennifer gave birth to a daughter, making Michael a grandfather. Holding the tiny bundle in his arms, looking into her perfect face, he felt a surge of love so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. "We named her Olivia Michael," Jennifer told him, her own eyes wet with emotion. "After you." The honor of having his first grandchild named partly for him was overwhelming. As he cradled little Olivia, Michael realized that life was offering him new roles, new joys, new reasons to embrace each day. Spring brought more changes. Mark announced he was returning to the States permanently, having accepted a position at a tech company in Chicago. Though not as close as Boston, it was still within reasonable traveling distance, and Michael looked forward to having both his children back on the same continent. His relationship with Claire continued to develop at its own pace. They enjoyed each other's company, supported each other's interests, and gradually built a connection based on mutual respect and genuine affection. There were no dramatic declarations or ultimatums, just a steady deepening of feeling that felt right to both of them. In April, exactly 1 year after David had delivered the news that had shattered Michael's world, he found himself back at Riverside Park, sitting on the same bench where he had learned of Eleanor's betrayal. The trees were in bloom now, the river flowing peacefully below. Michael sat alone, reflecting on the year that had passed and all that had changed. He had survived the unimaginable. He had rebuilt his life, piece by piece, finding strength he hadn't known he possessed. He had discovered that happiness was still possible, that trust could be cautiously extended again, that his capacity for joy had not been permanently diminished. As he sat there, his phone buzzed with a text message from Claire. "Thinking of you today. Dinner later?" Michael smiled, typing back a quick affirmative response. Then he pocketed his phone and stood, taking one last look at the river before turning to walk back to his car. The path ahead was not the one he had expected to travel. It had been forced upon him by circumstances he would never have chosen. But as he walked through the park on that spring day, Michael realized that the unexpected path had led him to new vistas, new experiences, new connections that might never have been possible otherwise. He had not just survived, he had grown. And in that growth, he had found not just healing, but transformation. A life different from what he had planned, but rich with possibility and hope. Michael drove home, to the house he had reclaimed as his own, to prepare for dinner with a woman who had shown him that second chances were possible, to call his daughter and hear about his granddaughter's latest achievements, to work on a furniture project in his workshop that would someday be a family heirloom. He drove home, not to the life he had lost, but to the life he had built from its ruins, a life that was, in its own unexpected way, beautiful. Summer arrived with its long, warm days and languid evenings. Michael's life had settled into new patterns that felt increasingly natural. Work remained fulfilling. His relationship with Claire continued to deepen, and his role as a grandfather brought unexpected joy. Mark had visited several times from Chicago, sometimes bringing his new girlfriend, a pediatrician named Sophia, whom Michael liked immediately. It was during one of Mark's visits in July that the subject of Eleanor arose naturally for the first time in months. They were sitting on the deck they had rebuilt together, watching the sunset and enjoying a cold beer after a day spent hiking in the nearby state park. "I saw Mom last weekend," Mark said casually, his eyes on the horizon. "I stopped in Boston on my way here." Michael nodded, feeling only a mild twinge at the mention of his ex-wife. "How is she?" Mark took a sip of his beer before answering. "Better, I think. She's got a new apartment. Smaller but nice. She's working for a different real estate company." "Good," Michael said, and meant it. Despite everything, he didn't wish Eleanor ill. "She asked about you," Mark continued, glancing at his father. "Wanted to know if you were doing okay." "The truth," Mark shrugged, "that you seem happy, that you're seeing someone, that you're a great-grandfather to Olivia." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound the chirping of crickets beginning their evening chorus. "She's alone," Mark said finally. "Richard never left his wife, like she thought he would. And now," he hesitated, "now she's dealing with some health issues." Michael turned to look at his son, concern flickering across his face. "What kind of health issues?" "Breast cancer," Mark said quietly. "Early stage, they caught it during a routine mammogram. The prognosis is good, but she's starting chemo next month." The news hit Michael harder than he expected. Eleanor, for all her flaws and the pain she had caused, had been part of his life for over 3 decades. The mother of his children. His first love. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said sincerely. "Is there anything she needs? Anything I can do?" Mark shook his head. "I don't think so. Jennifer's planning to stay with her during the first round of treatment. Catherine's been helping too." Michael nodded, making a mental note to call Catherine for more details. "Let me know if that changes," he told Mark. "Despite everything, I wouldn't want her to face this alone." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Eleanor's situation lingered in Michael's thoughts. Later that night, after Mark had gone to bed, Michael called Catherine. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said by way of greeting. "Mark told you?" Catherine sighed. "The doctors are optimistic. Stage 1, no lymph node involvement. But you know Eleanor. She's terrified of losing her hair, of being sick. She's more worried about how she'll look than about the cancer itself." Michael could almost hear Catherine rolling her eyes, and he smiled despite himself. That sounded like Eleanor. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked, echoing his earlier question to Mark. "Just what you're doing," Catherine assured him. "Being supportive of the kids as they help her through this. They're worried about her, especially Jennifer." "Of course," Michael said. Tell her I'm sorry she's going through this, and that I hope her treatment goes well." "I will," Catherine promised. "And Michael? You're a good man. Better than she deserved." After they hung up, Michael sat in his living room, memories washing over him. Not the recent painful ones of betrayal and divorce, but older, gentler recollections. Eleanor laughing as they danced at their wedding, her face radiant with joy when Jennifer was born, the quiet companionship of reading together on Sunday mornings, her hand finding his in the dark during a thunderstorm that had frightened her. Those moments had been real, even if the foundation of their marriage had ultimately proven flawed. The good years had not been erased by the bad ending. The next morning, Michael sent a simple text message to Eleanor. "Mark told me about your diagnosis. I'm sorry you're facing this challenge. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask." Her reply came hours later. "Thank you, Michael. That means more than you know." He shared the news with Claire that weekend during their regular Sunday brunch. She listened attentively, her expression thoughtful. Michael appreciated her directness, the way she never shied away from difficult conversations. "Concerned," he admitted. "Sad. We may not be married anymore, but I don't want her to suffer." Claire reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "That's because you're a compassionate person," she said. "It's one of the things I love about you." It was the first time either of them had used the word love, and it hung in the air between them, significant but not overwhelming. Michael squeezed her hand in return, a silent acknowledgement. "If you need to be there for her in some way," Claire continued, "I understand. She was part of your life for a long time. She's the mother of your children." "Thank you," Michael said, grateful for her understanding. "I don't know what that would look like, but knowing you support me means a lot." August brought Jennifer's call. Eleanor had started chemotherapy and was struggling with the side effects. She was too proud to ask for help, but Jennifer was concerned about leaving her alone between treatments. "I can stay for the first week," Jennifer explained, "but then I need to get back to Olivia and Rob. Mark can come for a weekend, but with his new job." "Could you check on her?" Jennifer asked hesitantly. "Maybe bring some groceries, make sure she's eating? I know it's a lot to ask, but..." And so, on a warm August afternoon, Michael found himself standing at the door of Eleanor's new apartment, a bag of groceries in one hand and a container of homemade soup in the other. He had called ahead, not wanting to surprise her, especially given her condition. Eleanor opened the door slowly, and Michael was struck by how different she looked. She had always taken pride in her appearance, but now her face was pale, her hair noticeably thinner, her body frailer than he remembered. She wore a colorful scarf around her head, an attempt at maintaining some semblance of her former style. "Michael," she said, her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. "Thank you for coming." He followed her into the apartment, which was small but tastefully furnished. The living room opened into a compact kitchen, where he set down the groceries. "Jennifer mentioned you weren't feeling up to shopping," he said, unpacking the bags. "I brought some basics, and Sarah, David's wife, made you some soup. She's a great cook." Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, watching him. "That's very kind of her. And of you." There was an awkward moment of silence as Michael finished putting away the groceries. He turned to find Eleanor still watching him, her expression unreadable. "Would you like some tea?" she offered. "I can still manage to boil water." As Eleanor prepared the tea, moving slowly but deliberately, Michael took in the apartment. There were familiar items. The painting they had bought on their 20th anniversary trip to Italy, photographs of the children, books he recognized from their shared library. But there were also new things, pieces of a life he wasn't part of. "How are you feeling?" he asked when they were settled at the table, steaming mugs before them. Eleanor sighed. "Honestly? Terrible. The chemo makes me sick, I'm tired all the time, and I'm losing my hair." She touched her scarf self-consciously. "But the doctors say it's working, so I try to focus on that." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "With the chemo and radiation afterward, they expect a full recovery." She paused, then added softly, "If I can get through it." "You will," Michael said with certainty. "You've always been stronger than you think." Eleanor looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. "That's generous of you to say, considering you broke my heart?" Michael finished for her, his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "That happened," Michael acknowledged. "It was painful, and it changed the course of my life. But it doesn't erase the 30 years before it, or the fact that you're Jennifer and Mark's mother, or that I still care what happens to you." They talked for another hour, carefully navigating around the most painful topics, focusing instead on their children, their work, the practical aspects of Eleanor's treatment. When Michael rose to leave, Eleanor walked him to the door, moving more slowly than when he had arrived, fatigue evident in her posture. "Thank you for coming," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "It meant a lot." Michael nodded. "I'll check in again next week, after Jennifer leaves. Is there anything specific you need?" Eleanor hesitated, then shook her head. "Just knowing someone's checking on me is enough." As Michael drove home, he reflected on the visit. It had been strange seeing Eleanor in this new context, not as his wife, not as the woman who had betrayed him, but as someone from his past who was facing a difficult present. The anger that had consumed him after discovering her affair had faded, replaced by a more complex mix of emotions, concern, compassion, and a kind of detached goodwill. He had meant what he said about the 30 years before the betrayal. They couldn't be erased, nor would he want them to be. Those years had given him his children, countless good memories and experiences that had shaped him into the person he was now. Over the next few months, Michael settled into a routine of checking on Eleanor once a week. Sometimes he brought groceries or a meal. Other times he simply sat with her, providing company during her increasingly good days or quiet support during the bad ones. They talked about safe topics: Jennifer's plans for Olivia's first birthday, Mark's promotion at work, mutual friends, books they had read. Occasionally, the conversation would drift toward more personal territory. During one visit in October, as Michael was fixing a loose cabinet door in Eleanor's kitchen, she broached the subject of his relationship with Claire. "Jennifer mentioned you're seeing someone," she said, watching him work. "She seems to like her." Michael tightened the final screw before answering. "Yes, Claire. We've been seeing each other for about a year now." The question was simple but loaded with implication. Michael considered it carefully. "Yes," he said finally, "I am." There was a moment of silence before she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry I couldn't be the one to make you happy in the end." Michael put down the screwdriver and turned to face her. "We had good years, Eleanor. Many of them. I haven't forgotten that." "Neither have I," she replied, tears in her eyes. "I think about it all the time now, how I threw it all away for something that wasn't real." Michael didn't know how to respond to that. Part of him wanted to agree, to remind her of the pain her choices had caused. But another part recognized the futility of reopening old wounds. "We can't change the past," he said finally. "All we can do is try to make peace with it and move forward." "I've had help," Michael admitted. "Friends, family, Claire, and time. Time helps." Eleanor nodded, composing herself. "Thank you for still being in my life, even in this limited way. I know you don't owe me anything." "We're family," Michael said simply. "Not in the way we were, but through Jennifer and Mark, through Olivia. That doesn't change." As fall turned to winter, Eleanor's health improved. Her final chemotherapy session was in November, followed by a short course of radiation therapy. Her hair began to grow back, a softer, silver version of its former self. Her energy returned gradually, and with it, her independence. By December, she no longer needed Michael's weekly visits, though he still checked in occasionally. Their interactions had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted. Not friendship exactly, but a kind of respectful détente, a mutual acknowledgement of their shared history, an ongoing connection through their children. Christmas that year was a family affair at Jennifer's home in Boston. Michael and Claire drove up together, while Eleanor came separately. It was the first time they had all been together since the divorce, and there had been some trepidation about how it would work. But the focus on Olivia, now nearly a year old, and the center of attention, eased any potential awkwardness. Michael and Eleanor interacted cordially, their conversations brief but pleasant. Claire, with her natural warmth and tact, helped bridge difficult moments, engaging Eleanor in discussions about art and literature that revealed common interests. After dinner, as everyone gathered in the living room to watch Olivia play with her new toys, Michael found himself standing next to Eleanor near the Christmas tree. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Eleanor said, watching their granddaughter with evident pride. Eleanor glanced at him, surprised by the compliment. "And your curiosity? Look at how she examines everything before playing with it." They shared a smile, a brief moment of connection through their shared joy in Olivia. Later, as Michael and Claire prepared to leave, Eleanor approached them by the door. "It was nice to meet you, Claire," she said sincerely. "Thank you for making Michael happy." Claire smiled, her hand resting comfortably in Michael's. "It's mutual," she assured Eleanor. Eleanor nodded, then turned to Michael. "Merry Christmas, Michael. Thank you for everything." The words encompassed so much. His support during her illness, his willingness to maintain a civil relationship, his capacity for forgiveness that had allowed them all to be together for this family holiday. As Michael and Claire drove back to his home, their home now, since Claire had moved in the previous month, he felt a sense of completion, of a circle closing. The journey from betrayal to this moment had been long and painful, with unexpected detours and challenges. But it had led him here, to a place of peace he hadn't thought possible in those dark days after discovering Eleanor's affair. Michael reached over and took her hand. "More than okay," he assured her. "I was just thinking about how life takes us places we never expected to go. And sometimes those places turn out to be exactly where we need to be," Claire finished for him, squeezing his hand. Michael smiled, watching the winter landscape pass by outside the window. The pain of Eleanor's betrayal would always be part of his story, a chapter he couldn't erase. But it was no longer the defining chapter. It had become, instead, a turning point that had led him to new understanding, new relationships, new aspects of himself he might never have discovered otherwise. As they drove home through the quiet night, Michael felt gratitude wash over him, for the lessons learned, for the healing found, for the love that had entered his life when he least expected it. The road ahead stretched before them, full of possibility and promise. A future neither of them could have imagined, but both were eager to explore together. And in that moment, Michael knew, with absolute certainty, that he had not just survived betrayal, he had transcended it. He had found his way back to joy, to trust, to hope. He had found his way home.